Okay, or if you want, okay, end-to-end application we will try now. Later we will do an application with login, log out, name, email address. Just I'll use few parameters for doing simple CRUD operation. With annotations, we will implement end-to-end use case. So when I submit request from this form, I need to have a controller. So we will use at the rate controller. Directly our controller class should execute, right? Between earlier we used to write a servlet. Now you need not to. Just we will configure an existing dispatcher servlet. This dispatcher servlet will forward this data from this form. It will forward data to your controller in the form of request and response. From here, we will forward this to service, then service to repository. Okay. To use this annotation, right? To use this annotation and execute. In last example, I have implemented controller from a controller interface. We implemented using a programmatic approach, not by using annotation. Now if I start using this annotation, right? So while using these annotations in Spring XML file, we just need to add one more extra tag, okay? To activate this MVC annotations, you need to use MVC colon annotation hyphen config. So what it will do, it will activate MVC annotations, like how we activated context annotations, right? To read context colon annotations config. This will activate J2W annotations. This will activate MVC annotations. And using context colon component scan only, if you remember, component scan base package, we are giving actual package name com dot something rpu dot start, and it is scanning all the classes and creating instances. Just you need to add one more namespace, MVC namespace, and you need to activate them. That's it. Otherwise, this context column component scan, it can able to read your classes and it can able to create objects to them. But to use MVC annotations, not only controller, there are other annotations to map. Earlier we used to map front end to back end via Spring XML file. In Spring XML file, using being, name, actual, whatever action you have in your form, right? That action we used to put here, and we used to configure here our controller class. But we can avoid this. How we can avoid this mapping? We can avoid this mapping by using an annotation. Which annotation is helpful? There is an annotation called request mapping. Using this request mapping, we can avoid this manual way of mapping. Using XML file, XML based mapping you can avoid, and you can use at the rate request mapping. Here you can give the same action. And where do I need to use this? Annotation means on top of your controller method, whichever method you want to have in your controller. Model and view, okay, something create student request comma response as a parameters you can put. Those parameters will be passed to you, and you can use request mapping here. And there is one more attribute given, method. You can specify here whether your HTTP method is post or get or put. We can give the method specification also here, whichever you are using in your front end. So this is very important annotation. We will use this annotation in Spring Boot also. And there are some other alternate annotations also for this in Spring Boot. Instead of these, there are get mapping, put mapping, post mapping, delete mapping, so on. We have for all HTTP methods independent annotations given for get mapping, post mapping, and all. As an alternate for request mapping, we will use these in Spring Boot, not here. Okay, we'll use them in Spring Boot. So here, once done with your job in your controller, we can return finally model and view object. For this model and view, it will return, it will return view name as well as a map object, and a map object it will send back to dispatcher servlet. So for this view name, to understand the location, we will use view resolver configuration. So that view resolver also, right? Instead of using bean view resolver, instead of using bean class internal resource view resolver, right? We are using internal resource view resolver. We are using methods of internal resource view resolver. Yes. Yes, yes, I can hear you. Yeah, there are multiple HTTP methods we have, right? While creation of form, we use get method to use the get to post the data. HTTP post method we use. Are you aware of get, post, put, delete? Yeah. So it depends on your form. From your form, if you want to use, if you want to create data, generally for create purpose we use post. When you want to retrieve data, we will use get. When you want to, hmm, this is alternative. I am saying we will use them in Spring Boot, not here. Okay. In Spring Boot, these are the alternate annotations. So when you see it in Spring Boot, right, you will not surprise. For now, we will use request mapping only. Okay. Request mapping is the one of the important annotation that we use. Okay. So for view resolver, we need to use this bean configuration. First thing is we avoided this controller configuration from XML. This view resolver also you can avoid. You need to configure like this. Instead, you can use at the rate bean method in your configuration. So yeah. So instead of having internal resource view resolver, as usual, we can use simple configuration class. There you can use at the rate bean. As you know, at the rate bean is simply alternative for our at the rate bean tag. So here you can use at the rate bean, and you can configure view resolver here programmatically. Public view resolver, create view resolver. Here you can create internal resource view resolver, new internal resource view resolver, view resolver dot set prefix, and set suffix methods you can use. Here you can set your location of the page location, and the extension like JSP or whichever it is. So finally we are going to avoid mappings in XML file. Bean we need not to map, as well as view resolver also we need not to map. We can use completely, we can avoid completely XML way of configuration, and we can configure via annotations. Controller level annotation as well as view resolver also you can configure using @bean. Okay, that will avoid that will avoid complete XML configurations. So if there is no XML configuration, you need not to visit XML file and change your configurations every time. With just one time configuration, MVC annotation config, context component scan. If you can configure them, those are enough. Remaining everything we can handle in using annotations in our classes itself. Okay. And one time setup in web.xml file you can configure dispatcher servlet. That is also one time setup. That's it. Okay. Let me create one end-to-end application for this use case using complete annotations. Dynamic web project. Okay. Using Spring MVC, employee management system. Create a dynamic web project. So here you can configure web.xml file. So here is our dispatcher servlet, and we configured this for all actions which are having .rbu extensions, and library not yet added, right? Let me add libraries also. Copy, paste. So libraries also copied, dispatcher servlet configured, and one more XML file which is Spring XML file. Keep it here. Do we really need to keep it in WebINF? Can't we keep it under source? Like in our previous examples, we created one resources folder. There we kept our Spring XML file. You can use custom location also, you can choose, and you need not to follow this naming convention also. But in that scenario, you need to use one more init parameter here. When you use init parameter, you can avoid this strict naming convention XML file. Okay, that we can do. I'll show you later. For now, one XML file here. So as I said, I'll avoid these mappings. Bean name we are mapping with the controller here with URL. So we'll avoid this. And this one also, view resolver also completely. I don't want to create them here. I want to do everything from annotations only. Okay. So during stereotypes, we have used same context namespace, right? Use this namespace. So I'll create com.rbu package with the controller, service, repository, subfolders. And when I start this application, it will scan all the packages and create objects. Along with this, one more namespace required here, MVC namespace. Let's add that as well here. So here we have one MVC example, annotation example. I believe the eighth one may download, and yeah, you will find the namespace here. You can copy it. So here you can see. Oh, no MVC annotation. Okay, let's see. Without MVC namespace also it was functioning. Let's see. If that is working fine, then I'll leave it. Context colon annotation colon. This will activate annotations. There are so many annotations that we are using, right? Like at the rate auto wired. There are so many others. To activate them, we will use this context colon annotation config. Okay, let's see how it will function. Now, okay, all the configurations are ready. I need front end. Okay, I need front end. Let's copy this index.html, name, email address. On click register, I want to save it into database. Okay, and here employee registration form, name, email address. I want to save it into database. Yeah. So on click register for this action, I need a controller. So now you can directly start coding here. com.rbu dot. I want to keep controllers under web package. com.rbu dot employee management system dot web. Let's write controller class. Registration controller. Annotate it with the rate controller annotation. In previous use case, we implemented it from controller interface. Okay, we used controller interface and it was forcing us to override handle request method. But if I avoid this implementation, how I can get similar method which is having similar signature? Method name can be anything. Create employee. I need HTTP servlet request object, response object. But I don't want to implement this class from interface. It's okay. You don't need to implement it. Just use a controller annotation, and to map your request, use a request mapping and keep here your request registration.rbu is our request from the form. Okay, simple registration. Let me put RB. So when I get this request and the intended method here is post, so I need to configure my HTTP method here. Okay, method is equal to all methods are available. Trace, put, post, options, get, delete all. So our required method is post method. Keep HTTP post method here. So now the data will be mapped to this class. So here you can read string name I want to read, request dot get parameter of name, email, address. Yeah, once you got them, you can send it to next class. Next class need to be auto wired here. What would be our next class? Service class. So implement service class here. com.rbu.ems.service package. There let's have one class registration service. Service class need to be annotated with @service, and no need to have request mapping. Anyway, we will call this methods from controller. Create employee, whatever name, email controller is reading, you can forward here. Service may need to call DAO to forward this data. We need DAO. Oh, you can. Correct. That is the right way, but we are just learning this mapping stuff, right? I'll give you that changes also, okay? How we turn it into entity object, DTO object, that you can see, okay? For now, I am creating a plain, right? The plain way of forwarding data from controller to service, service to DAO. Let's see. Okay. So here we will have registration DAO class. There I'll perform all my DAO operations. So for DAO use @repository. And here what I may need to auto-wire Hibernate. If you are using, use Hibernate template, the most advanced one. Using Hibernate template, easily we can make CRUD operations. So beyond this, if you want to go with the Spring Data JPA, there you need not implement anything. That we will see it in advanced Spring Boot. Okay. So here also you can have methods in that save method. Save name, email address. I want to save using Hibernate template. Right. We have already similar implementation using which example student management system using Hibernate template, employee management system. Okay. So as soon as I save data, it will return me ID. That ID. Okay. Here we use directly entity, right? Acha. In previous examples itself we used direct entities. It's okay. You can keep this data into an entity object, create a model in our project. Creating one more package com.rview.model, an employee model we have. Here use the annotations, no mappings required. Use at the rate entity, at the rate table, give your table name. Okay. ID name, email address, salary also we have. ID name, email address, salary. Okay. Let's map to this table RBU employee. One more extra column we need to introduce in our front end. Okay. And the database schema is system. On top of primary key use at the rate ID. And for auto generated values here you need to use at the rate generated value generator strategy is equal to use auto for automatic ID generation. Remaining fields name, email address we will send from the front end and we will save it. Okay. So this is how you can use annotations to map your entity to table. Okay. These are Hibernate or JPA annotations. Okay. Now what I will do, I'll introduce one more field in front end. Name, email address we have. Salary field we require. Salary. Let's read this value also from the control. Now here we can keep this data into entity, right? Employee entity, employee equal to new employee, and you can set all these parameters. Employee dot set name, employee dot set email, employee dot set address, employee dot set salary, and you can forward this data to service. Let's modify service. Instead of having independent parameters, you can give direct entity here. From here you can forward it to DA, employee DA. So let's save it here. So here you can save it. Finally you can return employee or whichever you want. ID itself if you want to return, you can return. ID. That's it. So from service, you can auto wire the DAO registration DAO. Call here DAO dot save. That's it. Service implementation is done. Now call it from controller. So I need service here. Auto wide registration service. Registration service dot create. It returns ID finally. So if you want to keep it into map object, new hash map, map dot set, sorry, put ID. You can put your ID. Finally, you can return model and view. New model and view. So here you need to pass your view name. Finally, what page you want to return. Something page name is success. With the map object, I want to return. That's it. Your job is done. Just you need to create one success page. And configurations also still left, right? Create configurations also. Hibernate configuration. DB configuration required and MVC configuration also required now. So one configuration class, creating the session factory, and here we are using Arkel configuration file in the resources folder. Arkel cfg.xml file. Earlier we were using XML based mapping. Now you can avoid this. Instead of mapping via XML, you can use mapping class com.rview.ems.model.employee. So the annotated class we can configure like this. And the Spring XML file completely avoiding. Because all this mapping stuff configuring via annotations on. So this employee hbm.xml also not required. Just using Arkel configuration file and the annotated class configured here. So it can able to comfortably create session factory, and using this session factory we can create Hibernate template also. One more configuration bean is required. So you may create separate class or the same class. Anything would be fine. I'll be creating separate class MVC configuration class. So here I need one method to configure view resolver. At the rate bean public view resolver create view resolver. Here you can create view resolver. Internal resource view resolver is equal to new internal resource view resolver view resolver dot set prefix. So the location, output pages, where do you want to configure? In earlier example, we created one response folder. There we created it. Let's keep the same naming convention. Under webinf, I have one responses folder. From that folder, I want to return all my output pages. So you can give the folder name here, responses, which is part of webinf. From webinf, pick up responses folder. From that folder, return whichever page is having .jsp extension. Return view result. Bus. Create one bean like this. So it will guide your dispatcher servlet from which folder output pages need to pick up. So basically here I need not to have hi or hello. So our success page name should be success. Page name itself success. So let's modify this to success.jsp. So here you can read ID. ID is integer, right? So you can typecast to integer. Okay, let's try. Finally, it need to return ID. So if I see front end to back end now once again, as soon as I click on register button, it need to carry name, email address, salary data to this action. For this action, we have created a controller class with the same request mapping action, and whichever HTTP method we are using in front end, post, same method we are using. Okay, post to carry a lot of data via HTTP protocol we use. Okay, so just you need to know more about HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol will be allowing multiple types of methods. One of it is post. We will use it for create operations to carry much data. Get can't forward much data, and get based data is not protected. In the URL get data we will see, so that we will use always post for create operations. So here in this method, we are reading data name, email address, and putting into one employee bean object, sending that employee bean to service sending it to DAO doing save operation. Using simple Hibernate template, we are saving it. And this Hibernate template also we created via configuration class. Session factory created using session factory, Hibernate template created. And here to create session factory, as I need this Oracle cfg.xml configuration file. I have configuration file with all my DB configurations and my mapping bean also. Earlier I used XML based mapping, we avoided that. And we are completely using annotation scheme to map my bean to table. Everything looks good. If I run this application now, will it able to execute or not? We will see. For me, things looking good, except that MVC colon annotation config not configured yet. We will see. application start data. Okay, let's see. Send some data. Good. So data forwarded, and we are getting employee registration DAO exception. Injection of AutoWire dependencies failed. Could not AutoWire field Hibernate template. Error creating create Hibernate template. Bean creation exception. Create session factories failed. An annotation config instance is required. To use, if I read carefully what it is saying, to use a mapping class, you used mapping class employee. It required annotation configuration, where in our db config class, this failure is coming from here. So here it is saying instead of this configuration class, as you are using annotations from Hibernate, right? In Hibernate, we have one annotation configuration class. It is asking us to use this annotation configuration class. That's it. Okay, we changed it. Application is reloading. So it means restarted. Let's try once again. Things are executing, schema updated, one insert is happened, unique constraint violation exception we received. It is trying to inserting data here. It is using default sequence. One Hibernate sequence it is used, a default sequence, and it is trying to insert that value into this table. But as this table is containing data right already, it is getting issue. Let me truncate this table. Truncate table. Okay, completely data is removed. Insert it. Good. Data is inserted. We got next sequence value 2, that is inserted here. Yeah, it is also using internally sequence. When you use auto write, automatically it is creating one Hibernate sequence. A default sequence it is using. Hibernate sequence, next value from DL. So you can check this sequences also, whichever created, right? Maybe go to your database window and maybe check objects browser, tables views, sequences, Hibernate sequence. This is the sequence by default it created. The sequence will start from 1, increment by 1. For you, if it give 1, for next user it will give 2, next to 3, like that. So if you see here, I don't know what is this count. Beyond this I can't count. Yeah, very big number. So until this number it will generate IDs automatically. Okay. and this is created by default Hibernate, or else you know how to create the same sequence, right? You can use this sequence, create sequence, okay, and you can create the similar sequence with your required name, and you can configure that custom sequence as well. For now you can go through this default sequence. So now end-to-end flow is happening, no issues, right? Your data is going and sitting into database also. Finally, when I see, I can able to see my data also. Data is able to insert it. So maybe you can try and see. Log HTTP. Okay, try use this and post some data. Okay, we will see practically how it is working. Hmm. What happened? Number format. More than integer characters you entered. Maybe reduce that value and try to insert. Okay. Maybe for salary you have entered a very lengthy value. So that's where it is unable to parse maybe. Let me see. I can see successfully two inserts happened. Yeah. So data got inserted. So sequences, as it is using Hibernate sequence, right? I don't think you will get any ID issues. It will not produce you any ID issues. Okay. So still we have more annotations to see in Spring MVC, but I don't want spend more time here. Let's jump into Spring Boot, and there also we'll see all these annotations. Okay. So simple framework, and we can do all this stuff easily. Okay. So whatever configurations, lot of configurations we are doing, lot of code we are writing, that all we will avoid there, so that you can realize. Now if I start Spring Boot, right, you will realize how much less code we are using to implement the applications. You will easily realize, and what things we are avoiding, and how they are by default available from Spring Boot. Everything you will realize, okay, easily. Okay, tomorrow I'll start. So you just go through this example between, okay, these two MVC examples. They are, I think, more than sufficient for now. Okay, yeah.